If you know me well, you'll know that three of my biggest passions are technology, film, and video games. I like to try and keep as close as I can afford to the bleeding edge of technology and the modern applications it brings for gaming, film, and everything in between. Whether it's advances in video game AI and graphics, new screen and video technology, or just admiring the sleek aesthetic of a new game console. Sometimes the things that I enjoy most collide into each other. For example, imagine a story-rich and immersive video game which uses the very latest in technology. Imagine Half-Life. At the time of its release, the original Half-Life was a PC-only game, and I wasn't old enough to have played such a title, but it made some waves in the gaming community way back in 1998. It changed the landscape of first-person games and set the benchmark at the time for the very best in quality, with IGN calling it a tour de force in game design, the definitive single-player game, with GameSpot calling it the closest thing to a revolutionary step the genre has ever taken. While I never played the original Half-Life in its heyday, I was aware of it. I knew of protagonist Gordon Freeman, his AI-augmented hazardous environment suit, and I was aware of the game's plot. Humble scientist and laboratory operative Gordon Freeman goes to work one morning and inadvertently kicks off an alien invasion.
Get away from the beast! Shutting down. No. Attempted shutdown. It's not shutting down. It's not.
Some 6 years later, in 2004, Half-Life 2 came into being, a sequel to one of the best games ever made, which would itself become one of the best games ever made. The game's developers, Valve, actually worked closely with ATI, the graphics card manufacturer, who was subsequently acquired by AMD, to make it the best game it could be in terms of graphical power and realism, and it released to universal acclaim.
Kind of a big deal.
At the time, like with Half-Life 1's launch, it was a PC-only release. It wasn't until 2007's Xbox 360 release of Half-Life 2 The Orange Box, a compendium of Valve's biggest games at the time, which prominently featured Half-Life, that I had my first taste of Half-Life, and I was immediately hooked. By then, the game was 3 years old already, but still demonstrably better than a lot of other games on the system. It blew most games out of the water with its impressive graphics and physics engine, which realistically gives object mass, having everything in the game accurately affected by gravity. It really grounds you in the world when it uses the same rules as our own. It makes the game feel more special, more believable, and feel like there's more risk. This realism is compounded by the surprisingly emotional story, with rich character-focused narrative laid throughout. Through much of the game you have a companion, named Alex Vance, who serves as a sounding board for the events which take place. She almost tells you how you should be feeling based on the emotion she conveys for you, since Gordon Freeman, the character you play, doesn't actually have a voice.
Man, a few words, aren't you?
Half-Life 2 The Orange Box also had 2 additional episodic chapters which further developed the game's narrative. The game's second chapter, named simply Half-Life 2 Episode 2, ended on a rather huge cliffhanger,
Oh my god.
leaving you wanting answers, wanting more Half-Life. But as the years went on, it seemed that more would never come.